comprehensively discuss issues surrounding immigration at this summit, a real challenge for the administration. Matt Rivers, CNN, Tijuana, Mexico.
Some extraordinary images there. Thanks to Matt Rivers for that. Thanks for joining me today. I'm Amara Walker in for Frederica Whitfield. CNN Newsroom continues right now.
You are live in the CNN Newsroom. I'm Jim Acosta in Washington. The call to arms was coming from inside the White House. That is what the January 6th committee has promised to prove during hearings in the coming days. They say evidence will show that former President Donald Trump knew he had lost the 2020 election and didn't care, orchestrating a 7-point plan to stay in power by any means necessary and directly inspiring violence against the Capitol in his name. Here's what they've been telling us so far from the first hearing. The presentation is not some partisan thesis. We heard from witnesses in Trump's own inner circle. His cabinet almost turned on him and discussed invoking the 25th Amendment to remove him from office in those final days. Trump's Attorney General Bill Barr told Trump the idea that he won the election was BS, and Trump's own daughter, Ivanka, testified that she accepted Barr's assessment. Trump's defense strategy now is to claim his Attorney General, quote, sucked, and to throw his own daughter under the bus by saying she was checked out. So far, no Trump defense on this disturbing revelation we're going to tell you about. We see that the mob's chants of hang Mike Pence erupted after a rioter broadcast a Trump tweet about Pence's decision to certify the election results, and that's not all.
And aware of the rioters' chants to hang Mike Pence, the president responded with this sentiment, quote, maybe our supporters have the right idea. Mike Pence, quote, deserves it.
We expect to hear more on all of these revelations in the next hearing, which begins on Monday. Let's bring in CNN senior legal analyst and former federal prosecutor Preet Bharara and history professor Ruth Ben-Ghiat. She's the author of Strong Men, How They Rise, Why They Succeed, How They Fall, which now has a new epilogue we should mention about January 6th. Preet, let me start with you first. The committee promised that these hearings would be a blockbuster event. Did the first one, do you think, lived up to that hype, if you want to call it that, lived up to that assessment, that prediction, from a legal standpoint?
Well, from, I think, a legal and political and transparency standpoint, I think it was very, very strong. I think a lot of people had suggested it was going to be overproduced and slick because they have a former TV person involved in television news who was involved in putting it together. I think what you saw was a very crisp demonstration of evidence that they had that we knew about and some evidence that they had that we didn't know about. They didn't gild the lily. They didn't engage in histrionics. There was no yelling. There was no screaming. There was no overt emotion other than conveyed by the words of both the chairman and the vice chair, Liz Cheney, along with the other witnesses, some of whom, as you said, were testifying openly and freely to the committee, and some of those snippets were shown. So I think overall, not only was it an excellent job and made a big impact, but I think the ratings numbers are a testament to that also. Upwards of 20 million people on television alone, which is a lot more than what people thought.
And Preet, just very quickly, I mean, the committee also promised to share mountains of evidence. In your view, what does that look like? What does that need to look like?
Well, look, it depends on what you're thinking about. So far, we have the Justice Department having arrested hundreds of people who were at or around the Capitol that day. The committee has been focusing on the people who were more high up, who were in Trump's orbit, up to and including Trump himself. And I think what people are looking for, and what Liz Cheney signaled that she was prepared to believe, is that the president himself, the former president himself, was culpable in this. So the evidence that I care about relates to what Trump did, the statements he made, the people he ordered to do things, the votes he was looking for to sustain the big lie, and also the things he didn't do, like not calling the National Guard, like not talking to the Attorney General, like not talking to the Department of Defense during the time that this violence was taking place. And he knew the violence was taking place. So I think it's a combination of things he did, things he didn't do, communications he had, and communications he didn't have that'll, I think, present a picture of how blameworthy or not he was.
And Ruth, as we first reported, you were interviewed by the committee to offer insights about threats to democracy. I know you can't really get into the specifics of what was said behind closed doors, but what impressions did you have after talking to the committee in terms of, what they're looking at?
I was so impressed at the integrity and the diligence of the investigators, that they're casting a wide net, uh, consulting people like me who have worked on coups and what happens when autocrats think they're going to have to leave office and do anything, use violence to try and stay there. And it was very moving to me to, as a first generation American, to assist the work of the committee, and also to see that 20 million people tuned in, because it's so important to show that the rule of law is being respected. It's also important for our allies in the world. In a lot of places, you couldn't have a hearing like this, and anybody who wanted to investigate abuses of power would be locked up or worse.
And Preet, this morning, former Attorney General Bill Barr told Fox that he holds Trump largely responsible for people going to the Capitol on January 6th. Let's watch.
I said at the time, I said on January 6th, that I thought his behavior was shameful. Not because I felt he legally incited the riots, but I thought he was largely responsible for directing those people up to the Hill with the idea that there was something that could be done to turn things around and to stop the steal.
Preet, he stopped short of saying that there was legal liability for Trump, but is there a legal case?
That's an interesting caveat from the former Attorney General, who was very, very loyal to Donald Trump up until almost the very end. And that sentence is interesting, parsing his words very carefully, basically saying he's responsible for sending those folks to the Capitol, asking them to do something to save the election on behalf of Donald Trump, who had legitimately lost the election, as Bill Barr had told him, but then also inserting a little bit of a hedge, saying he doesn't think he's criminally responsible for inciting. Now, I don't know how Bill Barr would know that, because he hasn't seen all the testimony. He hasn't seen all the communications. He doesn't have all the body of evidence that the committee has and that the succeeding Department of Justice may have. I think the more you see and the more that gets revealed, the closer you get to a determination that one or more laws may have been broken. I'd like to see all the evidence, and I'd like to come back to that question at the end of the hearing, 6 or 7, as the case may be. But as a judge has already said, in connection with the discovery dispute, it's more likely than not that Donald Trump and others broke laws, including conspiracy to defraud the United States, and perhaps the obstruction of an official proceeding. But I'd like to see all the evidence first.
And Ruth, let's focus on this point made by the vice chair of the committee, Liz Cheney, on Thursday. Let's watch.
President Trump invested millions of dollars of campaign funds purposely spreading false information, running ads he knew were false, and convincing millions of Americans that the election was corrupt and that he was the true president. As you will see, this misinformation campaign provoked the violence on January 6th.
And Cheney also said Trump had a sophisticated 7-point plan to overturn the election. And the chair of the committee, Benny Thompson, flat out called this a coup attempt. Ruth, you're an expert on coups. What's the significance of that?
I was really pleased to see Chairman Thompson use that word, because it's the right word for something that's the result of a process that started, in a sense, it started before November 2020, because Trump had been trying to discredit elections for several years and forming his personality cult so the faithful would rally when he summoned them. But, coups can take months or years to plan, and this was a multi-pronged attempt to overthrow our democracy. And it's worth reviewing that, he tried so many things simultaneously. He had General Michael Flynn trying to have some kind of martial law or military intervention. Then he tried all the electoral trickery, which we know about because of what happened with the Georgia Secretary of State. And then when none of that worked, he went nuclear and did what autocrats have done in the past and used violence and summoned these people there to right this monstrous wrong on his behalf. It was really interesting, Jim. What came out recently is that Trump was trying to get to the Capitol on January 6th, right, and he couldn't get there. And this is consistent with if you're having a coup and you've summoned everybody and you expect to be anointed as the head of a new illegitimate government, you have to be there. And there's a phase in coups. They're violent, they're quick, and then you have your pronouncement of the new order. And so that's why he was trying to get there.
Wow, that is a great point. And Preet, I can't get over this indelible image of, Trump watching the rioters chanting, "Hang Mike Pence," and Trump apparently saying that Pence deserves it. How does this play into determining Trump's motive or intent?
I think it's really powerful evidence. Yeah. Look, I think it's very powerful evidence, as many other data points are. His defenders keep saying that he didn't want the bad thing to happen. He used language that was misinterpreted or overinterpreted by the people who stormed the Capitol and engaged in violence. But what puts a lie to that is the way he behaved after the violence began, and after violence was specifically being directed at or sought for Michael Pence. So it's totally inconsistent with the defense that he didn't want the violence to happen. And there are other bits of evidence and testimony, some of which we've heard and some of which we will hear, that show that Donald Trump delayed in trying to stop what was happening. The best person in the entire universe who would have been able to stop the violence earlier was Donald Trump. And by many accounts, he was reluctant to do it, kind of enjoyed that Michael Pence, was being, frightened and people were going after him. That is all consistent with the idea that he wanted what was happening, which was the violence and the prevention of the certification of the votes. So I think it's incredibly important to the overall picture.
All right, and we'll see how that picture develops over the coming days. It starts up again on Monday. Preet Bharara, Ruth Ben-Ghiat, thank you so much to both of you, both great experts. We really appreciate your time. And a reminder to check out Ruth's book, Strongmen, How They Rise, Why They Succeed, How They Fall. Now available in paperback with a new epilogue about January 6th. Great book. I've read it myself. Coming up, hundreds of protests underway across the country, renewing calls for gun reform after more than 250 mass shootings just this year. You're live in the CNN Newsroom.
Almost all carbon emissions come from industries that shape our world. But at Standard Chartered, we believe progress doesn't have to cost our planet. That's why we're helping our clients change the way they operate by mobilizing $300 billion in green and transition finance, accelerating the transition to a net zero world. Because where others see problems, we see potential. We're Standard Chartered, and we're here for good.
Afghan women are afraid that this is the beginning of your efforts to erase them from the workspace.
It's not clear. Even if we appear with the burqa, maybe they will say that women's voices are forbidden.
Did you ever imagine that you would be prevented from going to school?
Girls' education is fundamental to the dignity of Afghan life.
Do you believe that young girls will be allowed to go to school here in Afghanistan?
Connect the world with Becky Anderson.
It all starts here. Changing, fighting, creating. connecting. That's why we're here. We live here, we work here, we're from here, and we'll go wherever the story takes us.
I'm Becky Anderson in Tehran. We are in Jerusalem.
Real news that shapes our world. Exploring not just what's going on, but why.
I just want to press you on one further point.
Getting perspective on this region from this region. Places that many of us know, but few of us get to see. Observing countries on the move, still rooted in tradition. It all starts here, and that's why we're here, bringing you the world from our Middle Eastern hub.
Connect the World with Becky Anderson, Monday through Friday on CNN.
Out front tonight, a potential breakthrough in treating coronavirus.
We've gotten very little help from the federal government.
Could all this spending lead to a bigger economic crisis? One of our viewers saw you last night on the show. She says she's going to pay your rent this month. Shut up. I want to go now to an incredible story of survival. Would you do it all again in terms of being a nurse, knowing that that could put you at risk for this?
I want to help people more than I ever have.
Aaron Burnett out front on CNN.
Demands for tougher gun control echoing across the country today as people take to the streets for March for Our Lives demonstrations in nearly every U.S. state. A series of high-profile mass shootings from Uvalde, Texas to Buffalo, New York are reigniting outrage and sparking fresh calls for lawmakers to address the violence. The March for Our Lives movement was born in the wake of the deadly high school shooting in Parkland, Florida in 2018. Today, activists in more than 400 cities are taking part. And we have correspondents covering the rallies up and down the East Coast. Let's begin with our Brian Todd in Washington. Brian, rallygoers have heard from a slate of speakers at today's march there, and it was passionate at times. I was watching some real heartfelt messages from parents and students who've survived these kinds of attacks. What was the message?
Well, Jim, the messages were those of anger and frustration, mostly, that more has not been done to end gun violence in the United States, especially since the Parkland massacre in 2018. Also, this March for Our Lives movement was started by young people who were involved in the Parkland shooting, who are victims of the Parkland shooting. They say that they want to be the generation that ends this kind of nonsense, this madness of gun violence in schools and elsewhere. But also, Jim, the message was that of personal loss, people recounting the horror that they felt if they went through a mass shooting and the sense of loss. And part of that was the visuals that they put up here. Look at this. These are placards with pictures of the victims of the Uvalde massacre on May 24th. You can see these wonderful young children who lost their lives that day. And there were placards of other people, other gun violence victims dating back to 1966 that were put up along these railings here. And on that theme of personal loss, we did hear today, I spoke to Raymond Whitfield, the son of Ruth Whitfield, one of the victims of the Buffalo shooting. Also, we heard from X Gonzalez, who was a Parkland survivor. Here's what both of them had to say in our interviews and during the speeches today.
If it can happen in a grocery store at 2:30 in the afternoon to an 86-year-old woman who couldn't run if she wanted to, it can happen to you anywhere at any time.
How many ways can we say it? Gun violence does not discriminate. It happens everywhere and all the time.
Now, to be frank, there's not a lot of confidence among the people who spoke here and the people who attended this rally that Congress is going to pass really meaningful and, hard-hitting gun violence legislation here or, gun law restrictions. So what a lot of people were talking to us about in the crowd was they've got to take it to another level and be somewhat creative with how to pressure people. And one of them talked about putting more pressure on corporations in the United States. So, Jim, those are some of the things that we could see in the years ahead if the frustration mounts with Congress just not getting anything done on this issue.
Yeah, I get it. There's a lot of frustration and just skepticism, really, that anything's going to get done. Brian Todd, thank you very much. Polo Sandoval is in New York City. Polo, what are you seeing?
Well, Jim, the crowd actually just now breaking up after what was several hours not only of tribute, but a call
for change. What we saw earlier today was a massive crowd that started in Brooklyn and then marched over the Brooklyn Bridge as the NYPD cleared the way, and then made their way here to Lower Manhattan for a series of speakers. One of the last speakers just a few moments ago taking an opportunity to really sort of hail New York State as an example in terms of what kinds of policy changes people would like to see, many people would like to see throughout the country. Of course, this crowd wants to see in terms of meaningful gun reform. That speaker referring to those changes that we saw just a few days ago when the New York State Assembly introduced, passed, and enacted various different pieces of legislation, including increasing the age of purchase for semi-automatic rifles. And that's what we heard today from New Yorkers that were participating in this march. They want similar legislation to be passed at the Senate level. Of course, they're also very familiar with how difficult that might be to accomplish. But they say they're not giving up, especially as today marks 4 weeks since the shooting in Buffalo, New York, as New Yorkers became very familiar with the pain and anguish that comes with these mass shootings. And finally, Jim, I also had an opportunity to speak to New York Mayor Eric Adams, who says this level of violence that's being seen specifically here in New York City alone is no longer just a threat to the public in general, but he says to first responders as well. Here's what he told me.
Yes, I have never in my life of public safety and my public life, I've never witnessed the easy accessibility of guns, the easy feeling of using a gun, and the lack of fear of reprisal. That's a terrible combination. Traditionally, you shot at night. You feel you can get away. Now we're having broad daylight shootings. That's an indictment on our criminal justice system.
It's a chilling trend that the mayor is referring to, not just what he's seeing here in New York City, but in major American cities throughout the country as well, Jim. Back to you.
Yeah, it's frustrating for our mayors as well in this country, no question. Polo, thank you. Nadia Romero is in Parkland, Florida. Survivors of the 2018 Parkland shooting know all too well about this problem. They were among the first to create this student-led March for Our Lives organization, which really has made a huge impact in terms of galvanizing public support out there and these types of demonstrations that we saw today. What was the mood at the rally today that you saw?
Well, Jim, as you mentioned, this is where it all began here in Parkland, Florida, just a month after the Marjory Stoneman Douglas high school shooting, where 17 teachers and students were killed on Valentine's Day back in 2018, less than 2 miles from here. This was the site of the first March for Our Lives. And then we were back again today, more than 4 years later, and many people citing that not a lot has changed. So we did see change happen in Florida. Some gun laws were implemented right after that shooting, right after Parkland, including getting rid of bump stocks, including red flag laws, but we didn't see that action on the national level. So there were 2 lines that really stuck out to me tonight by the 16-year-old organizer of March for Our Lives Parkland. She said today, "Your pockets are lined with dirty money," and she said, "Our country is drowning in the blood of children." Those 2 very strong lines, those messages directed directly at lawmakers for their inaction on gun reform. And she was only 16 years old, putting this whole thing together and inspiring some 400 other March for Our Lives rallies across the country. She was just 12 when Parkland happened at the middle school right next door. She said she heard the gunfire. She was on lockdown herself, and she was able to use that PTSD to help fuel her activism. Take a listen.
Because of that experience, you know, I heard guns. I saw all the first responders flowing through the streets. And from those experiences, I developed post-traumatic stress disorder at the age of 12. It's something that a lot of survivors like myself and other people with PTSD feel is that we're watching as more shootings continue to happen. And I think that almost makes it worse. So for me, getting involved in activism, not only is it helping others, but it's also helping myself deal with my own trauma from Parkland.
And she's just 16 years old, creating her own nonprofit called Heal Together. Jim, it's a virtual support group so that shooting victims across the country can come together virtually to support one another, because she says there are so many of them who are sharing in these same traumatic experiences. That's where we are in this country. But again, one of the biggest calls for action is to vote. Be a participant in the midterm elections, not just in the presidential elections, and vote for politicians that want gun reform. Jim?
That's right, and a lot of those kids in Parkland are now of voting age, something that they perhaps were not back in 2018. So now they can make those voices heard at the ballot box. All right, Nadia and all of our correspondents covering these marches today, thank you very much. Up next, more than 20 million people watch the primetime January 6th hearing this week. But will the nation keep listening to what the House committee has to say? The legendary Sam Donaldson, former White House correspondent, my old job, joins me live next. You're live in the CNN Newsroom.
I'm Salma Abdulaziz in Kyiv, and this is CNN.
Gas prices, baby formula shortages, and rising inflation. Former U.S. Federal Reserve Chair Ben Bernanke joins Fareed for a look at America's economy. Is the country heading towards a recession? What can turn things around? Fareed Zakaria, GPS, Sunday on CNN.
Nothing is ever given to you in life. If you want to be a great businessman, you got to put in the work. And the same applies to survivors of trafficking. My name is Given Kachepa, and I'm now a dentist in Dallas, Texas. I grew up in Zambia. We grew up very poor. I was trafficked into the United States by an organization known as TTT Partners in Education. The mission of the organization was to go to African countries and bring kids to America to sing in churches. We were singing in malls. We were singing in schools. So the ministry had different ways of making revenue, and yet those of us that were singing were not receiving a penny from that. My dental practice is based here in North Dallas. We've been here now 5 years. It's been an exciting, wonderful journey. My goal as a dentist in the future is opening up clinics in Zambia. We have 2 of them that we've built from the ground up. And being a business person today, I just cannot foresee a situation in which I would work somebody without compensating them for the work that they're doing. It's important to me that we all try to get along and make life a little bit easier for each other.
On Culinary Journeys, meet Japan's Natsuko Shoji, a chef earning rave reviews. Inspired by art, she is a rising star in French cuisine and in an industry where men dominate. See how she overcame life's challenges despite the odds and is now paving the way for a new generation. Culinary Journeys, Sunday on CNN, in association with Ajinomoto.
My name's Jim Brailsford, and I lead the Industry and Solutions Marketing team for Kinaxis. It's absolutely key that businesses incorporate sustainability into their business models. Firstly, you have got the corporate objective and being a good global citizen. You've also got the need to be reflecting that to your public, to your consumers, that show that you are actually being environmentally conscious. And also, as supply chains are more mature and are considering all of these things in a holistic way, it develops a sort of a steadiness to their operation. Supply chain sustainability will become a qualifier. It will not necessarily be the winner, but it'll become a qualifier enabling you to participate in the competition.
I'm Mindy Kincaid in Atlanta, and this is CNN.
The divide that prompted thousands to storm the Capitol is still on display more than a year later, as Fox News, which played a key role in amplifying Trump's big lie, refused to air the first night of the January 6th committee hearings. You can see right there in the center of your screen, it's a remarkable image. Former ABC News anchor Sam Donaldson joins me now to talk about this. Former White House correspondent, covered Watergate. Sam, great to see you. I know you know this, but Fox hosts Tucker Carlson and Sean Hannity, whose own texts with the Trump White House during the insurrection were revealed by the committee. They called these hearings propaganda and a Democratic fundraiser. Viewers could see on-screen graphics calling it an anti-Trump show trial. I mean, you were there through all of Watergate, Sam. It's got to be shocking to you when back then much of the nation was glued to the news media's coverage of that White House scandal. Can you imagine a major network back then behaving like Fox during Watergate and just shutting it out, not showing it to the American people?
No, good to be with you, Jim. At Watergate, everyone wanted to know what happened. Republicans who supported Nixon wanted to know. They wanted to see the evidence. If he was guilty of something, show me. I'm here to see. And the Republicans and Democrats got together in the Watergate committee. They laid out the evidence as they could find it, the testimony. They sent it to the House Judiciary Committee, the proper route for impeachment. Now, this committee has said it found the evidence. It's going to lay it out for the American people. It's then going to send it to the Justice Department for prosecution. That's the right route for Donald J. Trump, not impeachment. He tried that twice, and that didn't work.
But I guess your thoughts on, a major TV personality like Sean, Sean Hannity having his texts shown during these hearings, I mean, almost with his hand caught in the cookie jar, while at the same time he's on his program telling his viewers, nothing to see here, don't watch what's happening on these other networks. It's pretty remarkable.
Of course, that's one of the problems the January 6th committee has in trying to lay out for the American people the evidence and saying to them, well, hey, here's the evidence, take a look at it. If people won't take a look at it, well, you're not going to persuade them to anything. And I think in this case, it's not like Watergate, where everyone wanted to know what are the facts, what is the truth. And when it finally came out, Richard Nixon's theory was that he could still survive it, but no, the Republican Party turned against him. Look at what Republicans are doing today. Ron Johnson, you just showed again video of the terrible, vicious assault on our capital of all the people. Ron Johnson's a Republican senator from Wisconsin. Afterward, he said, well, all in all, it was a peaceful demonstration. Oh, Senator Johnson, who's going to believe you? Well, unfortunately, as opposed to the Watergate days, a large segment, a minority segment of the American people don't want to see the evidence. They want to believe what they think they know, and that's what they're going to stick to. And so that's more difficult for the January 6th committee to lay it out.
And two Murdoch family newspapers had one scathing message for Trump in the wake of these hearings. The New York Post writing today, this is their editorial board, Trump has become a prisoner of his own ego. He can't admit his tweeting and narcissism turned off millions. He won't stop insisting that 2020 was stolen, even though he's offered no proof that it's true. Meanwhile, reports that Trump was pleased that the January 6th crowd chanted for Pence to be hanged, a truly reprehensible statement, makes him unworthy for the office. Trump can't look past 2020, let him remain there. And then separately, the Wall Street Journal editorial board concluded with this quote saying, Mr. Trump betrayed his supporters by conning them on January 6th, and he's still doing it. Sam, what do you make of the Murdoch newspapers coming out after Trump in this fashion, I guess despite the fact that Fox was shutting out the hearing the other night?
Well, Murdoch owns both of them. He owns Fox, and he owns the Wall Street Journal. And what you see there is a dichotomy from the standpoint of saying to one group of viewers or listeners one thing, and to another thing. Let me tell you about Rupert Murdoch. I think you know it. He's after the cash. He's after the money. It's a business. I understand that, and I'm for the free enterprise system. I'm for the capitalistic system, except, of course, for the injuries it sometimes can do to people. But he uses Fox and he uses the Wall Street Journal and all his publications to make money. Now, you remember when Fox had a big problem on election night. It called Arizona for Joe Biden before any other news organization. And what Fox discovered was its viewers were agonized. Its viewers were angry. How dare you do that to our man, Donald J. Trump? Surely he won Arizona. He didn't. But Fox lost viewers to One America and to the other upstarts on the right. Well, it learned its lesson. If it wants to make money, it has to have Sean Hannity. It has to have Tucker Carlson. Tucker Carlson can say that, Putin's invasion of Ukraine had some justification. And his viewers like that. And Murdoch likes the money it brings him.
And Sam, I have to ask you, as somebody who covered Watergate, and I know you found those hearings to be totally compelling back in those days. They had a very large impact on the American people and shaping public opinion in terms of how the public felt about Richard Nixon at that time. Given that knowledge that you have, that experience you have, how do you think this January 6th committee handled itself the other night, the presentation from Liz Cheney and Benny Thompson, and what do you want to see moving forward?
Well, I think it handled itself quite well. It laid out in broad aspects what it's going to show us with the specifics and the testimony and the evidence in the coming days. And that's what it should have done. But no one expects that a whole number of Americans who have supported Donald J. Trump right down the line, who don't want to see the evidence, are going to be changed. I don't think that Rudy Giuliani and the lawyer Eastman, who came up with the idea that the states could submit alternative electors to Congress, not the ones elected by the people of their state, I don't think they were watching. And if they were, they're not going to say to themselves, oh, gee, I was wrong. Look what the evidence shows. I'm going to repent. Not for a moment. Not for a moment. And the big basic problem here, Jim, between the two, the Watergate situation and this situation is, I repeat myself, then almost all Americans, certainly a vast majority, wanted to know the truth. They wanted to know the facts. Many skeptical in the beginning that Richard Nixon had anything to do with this. Rightly so, perhaps. Until the evidence is there, why not? Reserve judgment. Now, 1/3 or more of the American people simply have tuned out the facts. If I tell them the apple falls down because Newton's first law of gravity says it will, and we sit under the apple tree and it falls on their head, they won't believe it. That wasn't an apple. The apple falls sideways because Trump says so. And I don't know how you solve that problem. I don't really know. If I did, I'd give you an answer.
Yeah. Well, the truth is not partisan, but sometimes the truth hurts, as you and I both know. Sam Donaldson, great to see you as always. Thanks so much, and we'll have you back again. Let's see how it goes with these hearings and have you back and get your assessment.
Enjoyed to see it. Thank you very much, Jim.
All right. Thank you, Sam. Much appreciated. All right. Coming up next, take a look back at another time when America had its eyes glued to congressional testimony about the actions of a president. It was 1973, and it was President Nixon in the hot seat, as Sam Donaldson was just talking about. So what made John Dean decide to testify against Nixon? Here's a preview.
Secrets and lies are far too common in politics. And I have, from my experience, learned in the long run, they don't work. The truth has its own way of coming out and will come out. The weekend of April 14, 15, 1973 is when the Watergate cover-up imploded. I had talked to Haldeman and Ehrlichman the fact that I thought we were breaking the law. And I showed, particularly Ehrlichman being a lawyer, the statute that was involved and why I thought we were violating it. He said, I disagree. John, he said, I have no criminal intent, and so I didn't violate these statutes. I can't believe that a man who went to law school had to miss school the day they talked about criminal intent.
Remarkable stuff. Be sure to tune in. Watergate, Blueprint for a Scandal continues tomorrow night at 9 on CNN. We'll be right back.
It's totally covered in solar, also the side panels, and we have this patented proprietary solar technology which we developed over the last couple of years. And this vehicle here is recharging on average per day 10 miles. In a week it's 70 miles through the sun. Additionally, of course, I have a battery on board. I can recharge it just as a regular electric vehicle, but we have this convenient feature. It's taking away this fear of recharging, this fear of range anxiety, and making it more convenient, energy efficient, and you're saving costs. Energy is coming from the sun for free. And the second pillar is selling and licensing this technology to B2B customers. Trucks, train, buses, camper van. There's huge potential in this market to make the whole logistic industry more greener.
I want this show, One World, to be a place where people watching from all corners of the globe can understand why what happens in Africa has a huge impact on all of our lives in ways we might never even know. Because of my background, I am well aware of the vibrancy of this continent, and I want to show that to the world. People of my continent do deserve to be heard. We are rich in ways beyond the soil beneath our feet.
One World with Zain Asher, weeknights on CNN.
Here now at the home of one of the FSB team, and my name's Clarissa Ward. I work for CNN. Was it your team that poisoned Navalny?
It's just been a chaotic scene here. People are so exhausted. Just gonna help her carry this bag.
We were just in the hospital. It was shocking. Why do you think India has been hit so badly?
Scores of Taliban fighters, and just behind us, the U.S. Embassy.
Why does a small group of women asking for their right to be educated threaten you so much? Raise your hand if you love school.
I'm the one who has to look them in the eye. Can I have your word? These people are depending on you.
You can hear gunshots every couple minutes.
And now they're pressing in. They want desperately to tell their story.
In case you needed another sign of how much more you're paying at every turn, inflation hit 8.6% for the 12 months ending in May, the fastest pace it's gone up in 40 years. So if you haven't gotten a raise of 8.6% over the past year, you can do the math. Add to this, the national average price of gas just hit a record $5 a gallon. Let's talk about this. Mark Zandi is the chief economist at Moody's Analytics. He joins me now. Mark, great to see you. Thank you so much. As you know, food at home has risen 10%. Energy has risen almost 35%. How much worse is this going to get? Have we plateaued maybe, and perhaps relief is in sight?
Jim, yeah, I think so. I mean, a lot depends on the Russian invasion of Ukraine, how that plays out, and what that does to oil prices, which obviously is key to the run-up in gasoline and diesel prices here. So it's hard to know, whether we're at the end of that, but we're certainly closer to the end than the beginning. So, and I do think as we look towards the end of the year to this time next year, I would expect at worst oil prices leveling off and supply chains easing and inflationary pressures abating. So I've said this before and I've been wrong that we've seen the peak. I thought that was back in March. So, obviously I say this with lots of trepidation, but I do think we're close to a peak, and we'll see better inflation numbers down the road here.
Yeah, I mean, we want to be optimistic about this for sure. And Mark, I mean, you and I drive past the gas stations and we see these eye-popping gas prices. What does history tell us about gas prices? And how quickly could this reverse? And for the folks at home who are wondering, why am I paying so much? I mean, what do you tell people?
Well, you know, I think you can connect the dots right back to the Russia's invasion of Ukraine. I mean, and then the sanctions. So the U.S. put sanctions on Russian oil, and then the European Union a few weeks ago imposed sanctions on Russian oil. So you're taking all that oil out of the oil market, and it takes some time for supplies from other parts of the world, from the U.S., from Saudi Arabia, from the UAE, to kind of kick in and fill the void. In the interim, you've got this imbalance between supply and demand and higher prices. So at this point, I think all the sanctions are in. I don't think there are any other countries that are going to impose sanctions. And I expect supplies to pick up because at these prices, these energy companies can make a lot of money, and I think they're going to produce more. The Saudis seem to be suggesting that they will produce more. So I do expect prices to begin to abate. But, you know, I don't think these prices are going to come in fast because there's a big hole to fill given all the sanctions on Russian oil.
Do you think customers are being gouged?
No, I don't think that's a part of the story. I mean, if you look at the margins, the profit margins of energy companies, you know, I don't think they're out of bounds from historical norms. So I don't think that's what's going on here. I think, you know, it's really about the fact that, you know, demand is there, but the supply has been significantly curtailed because we just said we're not buying Russian oil to put pressure on the Russians to do the right thing. And as long as that's the case, that prices are going to be high.
And any administration policies that should be considered at this point? I mean, you know, there is some talk about the Biden administration trying to mend fences with Saudi Arabia. What do you think? Could that have an effect?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's about supply. We need more oil produced, and the Saudis have excess capacity, you know, fair share of it. So I do think it makes sense for the president to talk to the Saudis and try to figure out a way to get them to pump more oil. There's a few other countries that have capacity. The United Arab Emirates, I mentioned. You know, I'm just a thought. You know, Iran has a lot of excess capacity as well. 2 to 2.5 million barrels a day out of 100 million barrels is a lot of oil. We need to come to some kind of agreement with them. Perhaps that could be accelerated. Of course, there's all kinds of pros and cons there, yet geopolitical things you have to think through, but that's a possibility. But it's also going to just take time because, you know, there's physical constraints on the ability of American producers because there's a capacity to produce more here as well, but there's a physical constraint on their ability to put more rigs in the ground and produce more oil. So it's just going to take time. So there's no smoking gun, slam dunk solution here. It's going to, you know, just be a bit of time before supplies kick in and prices come down.
All right, Mark Zandi, thank you very much. Also, a lot of humanitarian considerations to keep in mind as well as the U.S. is trying to find a solution for these prices in the Middle East. Mark, thank you very much, and we'll be right back.
Business never sleeps. As the sun sets in Seoul and Shanghai, deals are signed in Dubai, and Europe is already in play. New York prepares to make its first move. I'm Julia Chatterley, journalist, global market analyst, and host of CNN's First Move. Join me in the financial capital of the world for a market-moving perspective on the news influencing global politics, culture, and finance. I'll speak to newsmakers, risk takers, and the ultimate game changers.
Bold moves, big deals, winning trades. It's all right here
Make CNN your first move.
First Move with Julia Chatterley. Weekdays on CNN.
End of 2021, we had 7.28 million tourists that came into Dubai. Not big numbers compared to before, but very big considering the circumstances globally. Then you look at the first quarter of this year, where Expo, of course, was tail-ending the second half of Expo. We had close to 4 million visitors that came in Q1. That's amazing.
You're not back at pre-COVID levels then?
Not yet,
Not
but
yet.
the spirit is there. For us, as Dubai, the appetite was always to go back to pre-COVID as much as we could. So it's great the fact that the private and public sector relationship is so strong that whatever we do it together. I always talk about Dubai being almost like a board, where even the private sector have a say, and they're heard, and then things are implemented. So it's not just one person decides everything else. That's the difference about Dubai.
Alex Jones.
Those thought patterns, the three presenters, QAnon group, or the anti-vaxxers, they all originate from Alex.
How much damage can one man do to school shooting victims?
Alex Jones lied about Sandy Hook.
And the country.
The people who listen to him believe the things that he says.
CNN asks those who know him.
He's not like you or me.
The truth doesn't really matter at all.
CNN Special Report, Megaphone for Conspiracy. Alex Jones, Monday on CNN.
I'm Paulo Sandoval in Bogota, Colombia, and this is CNN.
New shocking comments from Uvalde School Police Chief Peter Arredondo. Arredondo spoke to the paper by phone in written statements and through his attorney. We reached out to Arredondo for comment, but his attorney tells CNN his client is not doing any interviews right now. CNN's Camila Bernal joins me now from Uvalde, Texas. Camila, this is interesting. What is the chief saying?
Yeah, Jim, this is very interesting. And the chief is saying that not only did he not consider himself to be the incident commander that day, but he also said he assumed someone else had taken on that role. He said he believed he was taking on the role of a first-hand responder, a frontline responder. He's told the Tribune that he did not issue any orders that day. And yet the Tribune is also reporting that he did tell other officers to begin breaking windows in order to get children and teachers out of the other rooms. So just a lot of different information and still a lot of questions. I want to read one direct quote from the Tribune where he said not a single responding officer ever hesitated, even for a moment, to put themselves at risk to save the children. Now, we learned a lot of new details in this Texas Tribune article, and one of them being what he did with the radios. There were a lot of questions on whether or not he had radios at the school, and he told the Tribune a couple of things. First, that he left 2 radios outside of the school upon arrival. He thought the radios would actually slow him down, so he wanted his hands free in case he needed to shoot. He said he was aware the radios didn't always work in some of those school buildings, and his attorney claiming that officers would have turned off the radios anyway. As a result, Arredondo was not aware of the 911 calls, children who were calling and begging for help. In the meantime, of course, people continue to come to this memorial, this community coming together, but still trying to understand how and why this happened. Jim?
That's right. Another weekend goes by. We still don't have all of the answers. Camila Bernal, thank you very much. And this week's